Good morning. All right, we're ready for our history lesson for the day, lesson 91. So turn in your book to page 271. We're going to be covering these pages today, these 5 pages. We're going to be looking at the war itself. So this is all the studies that we've done over the war, World War II has just been a kind of an overall thing. If you want to know more details, you'd have to read a little bit more. But all right, so you should be on page 271. At the bottom of 271, there is a map. This is the war in the Pacific. So this shows Japan, kind of in the middle of the map, up just a little bit there. It's a red island. It's kind of small. And then you see all the red up on the green area. All the red that you see is where the Japanese were taking over. Okay? Now, if you'll notice, let me see if I can find it. Where's it at? Oh, there it is. Okay. If you'll look, if you see Japan, okay, then look down or look south, you'll see the Philippines. A little tiny cluster of islands, the Philippines. Now, if you remember, way back during the Spanish-American War, remember how this was right after they fought in Cuba, America did, against the Spanish. Remember how America saved the Philippines from Spanish rule back during this time. This was way a long time ago. And then so the Philippines was not part of America, but America was administering and kind of working over there and kind of helping the Filipinos. Well, it's red on this map, which means that the Japanese came in and took over. So we're going to look at that here in just a second. Now, let's go ahead and start reading on 271. While the United States moved in Europe and North Africa, Japan advanced in the Pacific. After their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese tried to claim as much land as possible. Within 2 months, they swept into British, Dutch, and American colonies. The Allies tried to resist, but the Japanese were victorious in many places. Hong Kong, the Philippines, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies, now which is Indonesia, fell to Japan. The United States struggled to keep the Philippines free. General Douglas MacArthur, very important name, was in charge of defending the Filipino nation. Finally, President Roosevelt told MacArthur to leave. Roosevelt wanted the general safe to continue leading elsewhere because it wasn't safe to be in the Philippines anymore if you were American or if you were Filipino because the Japanese had taken over. So we're going to look at that here in just a second. So this is a kind of a zoomed in map of the Philippine Islands right in here. And since the Spanish-American War, the Philippines had been administered by the United States. Now, the Japanese came in and were driving out American forces, and the Filipinos and the Americans that stayed there were treated horribly, horribly. They had to live in terrible conditions. A lot of them were not fed, and they starved to death. Many of them were killed, and this made America very angry, and it's not a good thing to make Americans angry. Let's read at the top of page 272. So this is still talking about the Philippines. The general promised the Filipino people, "I shall return." The Allied troops still in the Philippines were forced to surrender to the Japanese. For the Allied soldiers who remained, life was hard. The Japanese rounded up American and Filipino soldiers. These soldiers had to march many miles without food or water. Anyone who fell down would usually be killed immediately. The soldiers who survived long enough to reach the prison camp suffered in horrible living conditions. There was not enough food and little or no medicines. Many more soldiers died in the prison camps. Americans eventually heard about this atrocity, and it made them extremely angry at Japan. All right, so let's look at something else now called the Doolittle Raid. It's kind of a funny name. Now, we're reading right here on page 272 and a little bit at the top of 273 to find out what was the Doolittle Raid. So even as the Japanese conquered more and more land, the United States wouldn't give up hope of a final victory. President Roosevelt had told the military to focus on Europe, but one man came up with an additional plan that would prove the United States was not afraid of Japan. Colonel Jimmy Doolittle led 16 crews of 5 men each on a dangerous mission. They took an aircraft carrier as close to Japan as they dared. Doolittle's pilots dropped bombs on Tokyo, Japan's capital. The planes couldn't return to the aircraft carrier because it was too far. Their tanks didn't have enough fuel for the return flight, so instead the crews tried to reach safety in China. Of course, much of China was under Japanese control. The mission was successful. 3 men died during the raid, but most of the crews escaped to friendly lands. 8 men were captured by the Chinese. 3 of these men were executed. The 16 planes did little physical damage to Tokyo, but they greatly helped the American cause. The victory encouraged American morale. The bombing concerned the Japanese. They had believed their homeland was untouchable after Pearl Harbor. Now they feared what the Americans could do. As the Japanese military conquered more lands, the United States found more weaknesses in the Japanese. So the Doolittle raid. All right, so let's look at one more battle. Midway and after. This is talking about the battle at Midway. We're reading in the middle of page 273. The Doolittle raid helped American spirits, but the Japanese kept advancing. They planned to move east and finally capture Hawaii. To get there, Japan needed to capture Midway. This tiny island lies about halfway between North America and Asia, hence its name. The Battle of Midway was a trap in many ways. Japan planned to trick American aircraft carriers into showing up at Midway. Then the Japanese would surprise them. Well, let's see what happened. Turn the page. Look at page 274. All right, with a large fleet, but the United States knew of Japan's plan. American code breakers figured out where the Japanese ships would be. When the battle began in June 1942, the Japanese were the ones that were surprised. The Battle of Midway was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. Until then, the Japanese Empire had been steadily growing. But at Midway, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers. The United States lost only 1. For the rest of the war, the United States pushed back the Japanese advances. Island hopping became the American strategy for the rest of the war. American forces needed to reach the Japanese islands. There were many occupied islands across the Pacific. The United States didn't have enough time or men to conquer each one of those islands, so instead, the Americans hopped from one important island to another, and then they would skip those that were less important. So they'd go to this island, and then go to this island, and then go to this island as they inched their way closer into Japan. And that picture there is a drawing of the battle at Midway. Some Japanese carriers headed toward Midway Island, an American island west of Hawaii. The Japanese hoped to attack the island base and then lure American carriers into a battle, but American naval intelligence had cracked the Japanese radio code and had advance warning. Planes from American carriers bombed the Japanese ships before the Japanese even made it to Midway. The Americans sank 3 Japanese carriers in just a few minutes, and the 4th went down the next day. The Americans' cost was also high. They lost 1 aircraft carrier, the Yorktown, and most of its planes and pilots. However, the Japanese sea offensive was stopped, and the Japanese Navy suffered a major defeat. So because American forces were able to decode their secret messages, then the Japanese thought, hey, we got this secret code, nobody knows it, but American forces, they figured it out. So American forces in the Pacific took 2 main routes. Admiral Chester Nimitz led the Navy across the smaller Pacific islands. American forces wanted to get close enough to bomb Japan. American forces wanted to get close enough to bomb Japan. General MacArthur fought in the large islands north of Australia. His forces steadily drove the Japanese out, and Japan's Asian empire was crumbling. So here we got the turning point of the war. We've come to the climax, and America is starting with the Doolittle raid and then the battle at Midway, because they were able to break the code and get these secret messages. Now, Native Americans, we know them as Indians, but their true name is Native Americans, mostly Navajo, joined the armed forces and sent secret messages so that Japanese were unable to decode them. So Americans used, they were called, I can't think of what they were called, code talkers or something like that. And it was in an Indian language, and the Japanese and all of the enemies were never able to decode our secret messages, but we were able to get theirs. Code talkers, that's what they were. So look at page 275. There's little information right there about the code talkers. This was from between the times 1939 to 1945. It was during World War II. Several of these, mostly Navajo Native Americans, joined in with our army and our armed forces, and they were able to use their language to talk. And so it was never able to be decoded. And they actually, without the help of these code talkers, we may have had more deaths, but they were able to help us win the war. So that was a fantastic thing. Okay, so we learned about several different battles and things going on today. So now let's go ahead and do our work text page. Now, one work text page I'm going to do with you, and the other one you have for a grade today, which is a study guide. So this is the one I'm going to do with you. So if you'll turn in your work textbook to page 122, go ahead and pause it as you get to that page. Okay, you should be on 122. So I'm going to have the words come up here after. I'm going to try to see if you can get them first. Okay, this is going over everything that we've learned today about the war in the Pacific. So if you want to look back, I'll give you just a minute or two, and you can also pause it and you can say the answer out loud before I put it up here to see if you get it right. This is going to be covering pages 271 to 275, the pages that we read today. Okay, so number one, the United States moved in blank and North Africa, and Japan advanced in the blank. Okay, now, so you need to figure out what goes in these two blanks and say it before I put the answers up there. The United States moved in blank and North Africa, and Japan advanced in the blank. We ready? The United States moved in Europe and North Africa, and Japan advanced in the Pacific. So go ahead and pause it while you write those words in there. Okay, those are just the two places that the war was happening in. All right, number two. After their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the blank swept into British, Dutch, and American blank. If you need to pause it, find the answers. I'd love for you to say those out loud first, see if you get them right. Okay, let's do this one. After their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese swept into British, Dutch, and American colonies. Okay, go ahead and pause this as you write those two in the blanks. Number three, General Douglas MacArthur was in charge of blank, the blank nation. Okay, General Douglas MacArthur was in charge of blank, the blank nation. This first one's kind of hard because defending. General Douglas MacArthur was in charge of defending the blank nation. Do you remember what nation it was? The Filipino nation. General Douglas MacArthur. So go ahead and pause this as you write these two words in these blanks. Okay, number four. President blank told MacArthur to leave the blank. President Roosevelt told MacArthur to leave the Philippines. Okay, pause it and write those in there. Okay, number 5. Colonel Blank came up with an additional plan that would prove that the United States was not blank of Japan. Colonel Jimmy Doolittle came up with an additional plan that would prove that the United States was not blank of Japan. Remember, not afraid of Japan. Go ahead and write those in there. All right, number 6, Doolittle's pilots dropped blank on blank, Japan's capital. Bombs on Tokyo, Japan's capital. Write those words in the blank. Okay, I'm not sure if I can, I'm going to have to, this is going to do the same thing that it did to me last time, isn't it? Okay, let's see. We'll have to do it this way. But my answers are already going to be there because I can't put them in. Maybe if I do it this way? No. Let me put these answers in. Okay, number 7, there's your answer. The victory of the mission to bomb Tokyo encouraged, see, it won't let me go down. Okay, so number 7 is the victory of the mission to bomb Tokyo encouraged American morale. Okay, let's see about number 8. I wish I could. See the answers are on here. All right. Number 8. The Japanese planned to move east and finally capture Hawaii, but first they needed to capture Midway. Jot those in there. Okay, number 9. Japan planned to trick American aircraft carriers into showing up at Midway. That's where the trick was going to be, but it didn't happen. It backfired. Number 10. The United States knew of Japan's plan because of American code breakers discovered where the Japanese ships would be. So it was the code breakers that helped us out. All right. If you haven't finished those, you'll want to pause it and write those in there because this will be a very good page for review. Okay. All right. Your assignment is to complete page 123. Now, it says mark all the correct answers. So several of these are going to have more than one. Some of them only have one, but several of them have more than one, okay? And this is a study guide page, so make sure you go back in your book if you need to and look over these pages. If you look at the bottom of page 123, at the very bottom beside the page number, it tells you where all the answers will be found between pages 258 and 275. Your answers will be on those pages, okay? All right, that'll be all of your lesson today.